Hello, good morning, everybody. Fergus Dolan here from NALA. I'm delighted to have you here this morning for our webinar on SoundCloud podcasting for the classroom or home. We're delighted to have Caroline Brennan from Dublin and Laoghaire ETB facilitating this morning, and my colleague Ailish Martin-Egan was helping me with hosting. So over to you, Caroline, all the best.
Good morning, everyone. Delighted you could join us this morning. So my name is Caroline Brennan. I am an adult literacy tutor in Dublin and Laoghaire ETB. I work for the Adult Education Service there, and I teach a variety of different subjects. I have taught from level 2 to level 7, but I also teach a lot of non-accredited courses as well, and they tend to be my favourites. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about how I have used SoundCloud in some of my classes. And this is very much a situation of learning from my experience. What I have done is by no means perfect, but I think, you know, if you wait until you're ready to start something, you're never going to do it. So hopefully you'll be able to learn from some of my mistakes and take what I've done and make it even better for yourselves. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen, and we're going to have a little look at SoundCloud itself. So traditionally, SoundCloud is just a platform for audio files. So anyone who has listened to a podcast, or maybe some unknown artists as well, has probably encountered SoundCloud. So let's just take a little look at it together. So what we're going to look at today, the first thing we're going to look at is a podcast project that I completed with a group of learners. I had a prepare for college course and how I applied the audio notes to that, and also a reading, writing and spelling group. So the pre-reading that we did and how we use SoundCloud to help people with their reading at home. And then finally, we're going to have a little look at how to use SoundCloud and the website itself. So the first group that we're going to look at is a group that I had, and the title of the course was iPads and Mobile Devices. So this was a non-accredited course. It was an evening class, and the issue that I had, or it's not really an issue, it happens all the time in further education, but it was a group that there was new learners, and there were learners who had attended the course before. So I really wanted to be able to do a project where the new learners would be, you know, learning the new information, getting to grips with using an iPad, getting to grips with using their phones. But the learners who had that experience would also be able to enjoy the class and participate in the class itself. So a little kind of course outline of how I approached it. So the first initial classes, we looked at the basic tools of the iPad itself. So, you know, making sure that they could change the volume, what Siri was, how to use the home button, and how to navigate the iPad itself. So then we had to be able to look at the app on the iPad in detail. So what were the installed apps and what were the acquired apps? And I think that this is really helpful because, you know, quite often when learners come to a digital skills class, they can be quite, you know, afraid that they're going to do something wrong, or afraid that they don't have enough knowledge. But, you know, I always put it to them that if you've set an alarm on your phone, or you've sent someone a message, you have actually used an app already. You have apps that are existing on your phone that you use every day and you're quite comfortable with. So, you know, it should be no problem to learn, you know, these additional apps. And then we had to talk about the types of apps. So you have apps that are web apps that you use online. You have mobile apps that you have access to on your phone and your iPad. And then you have a desktop app. So what were the differences between these? And why, when you went into, say, Word online, is it slightly different to Word on your computer? So we were able to talk through all the differences. And then we had to discuss how you would download an app. So how do you download an app to your phone if you want it? Or why would you download an app to your phone? And this kind of brought up the difference of Android and iOS. So we had a discussion on, you know, sometimes you might be on TV and at the end it'll say available on Android and iOS. So it enabled us to have that conversation of how they're different. But it's not something that learners need to majorly worry about, because if they have an iPhone, they're going to have the App Store on it. But if they have an Android, they're going to have Google Play. But it's just to enable them to have that knowledge around it. And then we discussed the idea of podcasts, so what they were, and how you would find them, the different types that there were, and we investigated them a little bit, so what they were and how to find them. And the great thing about this was that this was really helping us to use. Apologies, I think I muted there by accident. So this really helped us to use the Safari app, to use Google, to help those learners when they were Googling what a podcast was. They were then faced with a Google search result. So it was helping them to decode that information, because we all think when you Google something, you get the information straight away. But in actual fact, you have to sift through quite a lot of information to find what it is you want. So it was really helping them to be able to do that. And because we were looking at different podcasts, it helped us to be able to have that repetition that learners need. And when we started looking at the podcasts themselves, they would look at the different kind of buttons or icons that were around the podcast. And one thing that came up was downloading. So what does downloading mean? And what is the difference if I press the play button versus if I download it? And I think that can be tricky to get the concept of if you're not familiar with it. But I always liken it to the radio. So if you're streaming something, you're online, you're listening to it at that time. But if you are downloading something, you have a copy of it for yourself, whether you're online or offline, that you can use whenever you like. And the one thing I will say, if you are teaching any form of digital skills, this has come up for me time and time again. And it comes up when you're looking at YouTube, and it comes up when you're looking at podcasts. So it's this term of subscribe. So a lot of learners shy away from subscribing to something, which would actually make their lives a lot easier in terms of finding the podcasts they like, or finding the channels that they like on YouTube, because they associate it with subscribing to a magazine or subscribing to a newspaper that you pay for. So they actually think that subscribing to a YouTube channel means that you have to then pay for those videos that you watch. Or if you subscribe to a podcast, that you then have to pay for those podcasts. So I think it's really important just to flag that with them and make sure that they understand that when you subscribe to something like that, it's just meaning that you can easily access it when you log on to the podcast site or to YouTube itself. So once we had investigated podcasts, what we did was we actually discussed this project idea. So I floated the idea that we would actually create our own podcast. And I think that, the whole thing with adult education, learner voice, and I think anything where you're recording audio makes it really easily accessible to the learners. They're not hampered by, any literacy issues. So luckily, the group really seemed to entertain the idea. They seemed to really look forward to the idea. So this meant then that we could start researching sites to upload a podcast to. Now, I had all of this research done before, but I wanted to use it as a way of us to co-investigate the subject. Again, getting that kind of researching a particular topic through Google, through using Safari, so that they were getting that repetition. It meant that they were also learning how to navigate websites on an iPad. So they were getting really familiar with using the back button, the forward button, how to open up a new web page. If they wanted to save information, how they would go about doing that. So it was a really nice, gentle way to introduce how you would research something to the group itself. So we had a little look, we Googled sites hosting a podcast, and we had several different options. Of course, I wanted to go with a free option to make it accessible, and to also demonstrate to the learners that if this was something they wanted to do themselves, that it would be a real possibility. So we also had to then research apps for recording podcasts. Was this something that we needed to have special equipment for, or could we do this using our iPads themselves? And it also meant that we had to use Google to search for information you want, so the websites, that were going to host the free options, and the file types that were required. Now, this was a great way of introducing this concept to the learners, because, you know, for certain situations, you have to have particular file types. So it meant that we could research on those sites what file types were required, and then we could Google. So if we use our iPad recorder, what file type is that, and is that going to be compatible? So again, it was helping us use those researching skills and use the iPad itself. So we were also switching between the tabs on the iPad, between our phone, helping us bookmark information. And bookmarking for learners that are new to digital skills is an absolute godsend, because it helps them find those items that, you know, those websites that they really enjoy using again and again. It makes their life so much easier. So bookmarking is a really key topic I would recommend for anyone teaching digital skills. So then we had to decide that we were going to podcast, and we were testing it out in the class. And it was enabled me to teach them how to use the voice recorder app. Now, a side part to this was that, you know, we could actually use the voice recorder app in our own lives. So we could use it to record a shopping list. We could use it to record something to remind us to do something, rather than having to type it down. That was going to make your life easier. You could record it and then hit play again. So it was other practical uses of that voice recorder app as well. But to do this, what we did was, we were very lucky that this class was on in the evening, because, you know, we had a pretty much free reign in the centre. So what we did was we took the learners into different rooms, so different parts of the building, and each one took a turn in recording, just to get background noise, so that they had that repetition again, and that each one was able to contribute, and they were hearing the instructions again and again and again in different ways. So once we had all of this set up, we knew we were going to do our podcast itself. What I did was, I actually set up a new Gmail account. So I wanted an email account that was completely separate from everything else that I used before. And then once I had that email account, I could set up a SoundCloud account. Now, it's very easy to set up a SoundCloud account. I am going to talk you through how to do that, and I do have some videos that Fergus is going to share with everybody as well, that will help you just go over that. If you decide further down the line that it's something you'd like to do, you'll have that information there. That's easy to hand. But pretty much all I needed was an email account and to create a password for the SoundCloud site, and we were up and running. So this is what our SoundCloud site looked like. We called it Podcasting Fun. And you can see up here that we have our text was the first thing that we uploaded. So you don't have to spend a huge amount of time there. You can see this is just 12 seconds long, but again, it's just to get the gist of it. It is that repetition, and you know, you really want to be able to take your time with it and make it a fun experience for everybody involved as well. So what we did was, we had 4 people in the group, and I really wanted them to be able to talk about a topic that was of interest to them. So the first person that shared is a man called Kevin, and he had been in the army pretty much all of his life and had retired. And he's very active in the Veterans Association. So he really wanted to speak about army pay. And it's a very interesting listen. You know, so I think I actually learned a lot from it as well. So it was great to be able to hear it. And the second person, we actually split this into 2 different recordings, because it was on 2 different subjects. So this is a person called Mark Daly, and he wanted to talk about his experience with dyscalculia and with dyspraxia as well. And he had put a huge amount of time and effort into, you know, getting it right, what he wanted to say and what his message was. So we kind of played around with it a little bit, and it was kind of written in an interview style. So we asked one of the other learners, would they pose the interview questions, and they would work together on it. And I think it worked out really, really well. And it is a very interesting listen. So I might include the links to that as well, that Fergus can share if anyone is interested in hearing the results of the podcasts themselves. And I'm just going to skip down to Enda. So Enda was interested in talking about training catechists. Now, the fact that Enda came to me and said, you know, I'm a little bit nervous about talking about a religious subject. I don't want to impose my religion on anyone else. And because he had that sensitivity to the group, I had no problem with it. we discussed it as a group. Everybody was very respectful of each other, and so it was a non-issue. But you guys will know your groups yourselves, what are hot topics, what maybe you might steer them away from, because again, we want this to be a fun and enjoyable experience for everybody. So I'm going to go back to Bernadette. So when we discussed what we were going to talk about with our podcasts, Bernadette didn't really have an issue or a burning issue that she wanted to speak about. So we discussed it as a group and we floated a couple of ideas, and I had mentioned maybe she would create something herself. So maybe a short poem or story or something like that. And she really loved that idea. So she took that on board and she actually wrote a short story that she read then as her podcast. And I think this could work extremely well with literacy groups, because for more advanced literacy learners, they would be able to write their story and then record it. So you're getting that integrated learning, you're getting those digital skills and you're getting the literacy learning in the same time. But for your less advanced literacy learners, what you could do is you could actually allow them to record the podcast first. So they're actually speaking the story into the recorder. So they're not hampered by words they can and cannot spell. They can just let it flow and make their lives a lot easier. And then after this, what you could do is in their reading, writing, and spelling class or in a separate class, you could then be able to let them listen to this podcast and help them write out the story afterwards. And it helps you identify then, so what were those tricky words that came up for them, and what are the words that they really need to focus in on and help them improve their spelling. So that was the first group look at, and we did run out of time with this. I would have liked to have been able, for the learners, you can see this little square here, that you can upload a separate image with each audio recording. And it's as easy as sending an attachment in an email. It's pretty much the same process. You just tell the site where to find the file on your computer. But we did, unfortunately run out of time, but it is a nice additional, digital skill that you could go through with your learners as well. And the great thing about Soundcloud is once you click play on one of the audio files, this comes up that you can write a comment on it. You can like an audio file and you have the share button there as well. It also allows for notifications. So if someone likes, your audio file, or someone follows you on SoundCloud, it shows you that notification. So if you have, a digital skills group that you're maybe floating the idea of looking at social media terms and social media, this is actually a very safe and controlled environment to introduce those topics and those processes to them, that they could go onto their SoundCloud and they can, write on the group wall and be able to like each other's podcasts and share them with other people. So again, they're doing it in a very safe, very private, controlled environment, without, having to sign up to a social media site before they're ready. So the second group that we had a little look at was a group called Prepare for College. So this was a course that was due to start in May of last year, but obviously with everything going on, it wasn't possible to do it in the centre. So Barbara Hammond, our ALO in Dunleary, decided that we'd test it out online, and I have to say we're very lucky that Barbara Hammond is quite forward thinking and quite open to new ways of doing things. So I have to say it was great to be able to have that test run with it and try different things out with it. So it was 3 of us were teaching the course itself. It was split into 3 different modules. So Breda was taking the tech side of things so that people would be able to send emails, use the cloud, upload, share files and things like that. We had Helen took the side of learning to learn, so helping the learners discover about themselves what ways work best for them when they're taking notes and things like that. Are they audio learners, are they kinesthetic, or are they visual learners? And then I had the communication side of it. So the ultimate goal, or the overall goal for the course, is that by the end of it, they would have acquired the skills to help them start their new term in college. And we had the goal of the learners actually writing an essay by the end. So that was the real marker for us. So I had a particular learner in the group that was dyslexic. And I was very lucky that she had a diagnosis, she knew herself, and she told me, straight away that she had this. So it gave me time to be able to think, how am I going to share this information? Because when you're talking about writing essays, it is academic, and there is a lot of information that you need to learn. So I approached it that we'd break it down into separate bits. It was tricky with the class online because you've lost those visual cues or the non-verbal cues that you would normally have in the classroom. So I made sure that I used a website called Socrative. So we were giving a little quiz at the end of each class. So I was able to see what had they absorbed, what had they not, what do we need to work on again next week. But I also decided then that I was going to share audio notes with the group. So again, I went back to Soundcloud and I took the printed information that I had and I recorded it, okay? So it meant then that that learner could open up her email, click on the link, and she could listen to what we had covered in that week's class. So we then switched it to a flipped classroom method so that I would send her the work before the class and she would listen to it, and it enabled us to work on anything she didn't understand or anything that people wanted to ask or go through, which I found really, really useful. So there's two things that I'd like everybody to take from this section again, and learn from what I have done rather than having to go out and make your own mistakes. So the first thing is the labeling of your files, okay? So you can see I have number 14, assignment checklist. So if you have a Word document, or if you have a PDF that goes along with this, if you're using SoundCloud for your audio notes, then I really strongly recommend that the title that goes on the audio file is the exact same as the title that goes on that PDF or that goes on that Word document. And I would strongly recommend that you put a number to that file as well. So they don't even have to look for the title, they just look for the number, and straight away they can take their notes out, listen to it and read along, or they can just have it on in the background. And so that's really, really key. And the second thing that I would like you to take away from this section of the webinar is the order that you upload your files. So you can see here that I have 14 and then 13. And if we look at the next slide there, you can see that these are actually going in descending order rather than ascending order. Now, it's not a huge deal, and that's why I would recommend that you number your files as well. But when you are uploading to SoundCloud, each additional file that you add gets stacked on top of the other. So in an ideal world, I would have started with number 14, 13, 12, and worked my way, and lastly uploaded file number 1. But as I was working on the content as I was going along, that just wasn't possible. But as I said, you can learn from my mistakes. But if that's not an option for yourself as well, once you number them, it makes it nice and easy for your learners to be able to find the correct file, or the file that you would like them to be able to listen to. So the next group we're going to have a little chat about is an evening class that I had that were reading, writing and spelling learners. So I just want to give a little bit of context to this group. We had them in the term before Christmas. We had a goal of reading one of the Open Door books, and we actually achieved that goal. We read, I think it was Mrs. Whippy, and they were really, really proud of themselves. They worked really hard. We took a chapter or two every week, worked our way through it. We did our pre-reading with it, we read the chapter, and then we did some, our comprehension questions afterwards. So this was a group that they recognized all of their letters, they had their blends, and they recognized a lot of the sight words. So they were really quite, advanced reading, writing and spelling learners rather than complete beginners. So what we decided was we wanted to build on that momentum. And when, unfortunately, after Christmas, we couldn't continue with the evening classes, we really wanted to keep them going and keep them engaged with it. So Cara Neville sent out some packs. So we worked on this together, and we were able to kind of, keep them engaged with the service and keep them, practicing their reading, writing and spelling. So what we did was Caro sent out some packs, and these were the pre-reading packs that they were very much used to doing in the classroom. So we're going to take a little look at what that entailed. So I can't take credit for this pre-reading method. This belongs to a woman called Sue Wellburn, who unfortunately retired this year. But I have dubbed this the Sue Wellburn method because she took me in under her wing when I first started in the service. And this is kind of a method that she used. And I think it's a really logical method when you're approaching reading with a group. So first of all, what you would do is you would give your learners a word search. So you would read the reading beforehand. You would know your group what words are going to be tricky for them in that reading. And you take those trickier words and you actually create a word search for them. So you can see I've created the word search here for the reading that we sent out to this group. And you can see that they're actually, quite complex words. They are doing really, really well with their reading. So we want to, build on that momentum and keep it going for them. So the point of this is that they recognize the letters and they recognize the sequence that the letters go in. And then you're taking your word shapes. So you have your worksheet where you're using the exact same words, you're applying them into their word shapes. So you talk through with them beforehand. You have your tall letters, T, L, and you chat with them, a reminder of what are your tall letters, what have tops. And then you talk about the tails. So what are the letters that have tails on them? So, they'll say, J, Q, all of that type of thing. So you're giving a refresher to them. And then you have your square boxes. So these are typically your vowels, S, N, the letters that won't go above or below the line. So they're getting their first point of contact with the word search. They're getting their second point of contact with the word shapes. And then you're taking the exact same words and you're doing your look, read, cover, write, check. So when you're doing your look, read, cover, write, check, you would then take one of these words. So we have curtains up the top. You would fill it into the first box. You'd look at it, cover it, and try and replicate it yourself. And then you check and see if you got it right. And the one thing I find I have to, constantly repeat with the learners is that you take the first word and you complete it all the way across before you move on to your next word, because it is that repetition that really helps them remember what the word is or how you spell the word itself. Now, if we were in the classroom at that stage, what we would do is we would talk through the words. So we'd practice reading them. We would break it down into our syllables and we would go through the spelling or practice spelling the word and the pronunciation, because sometimes you can have a word, that it has spelled the same but has two different meanings. So we would talk about all of this and, how it's used in context, to ease our way into the reading itself. So then by the time we get to the reading, they've had those 4 points of contact and they are relatively confident with those trickier words. So it makes their life a lot easier when they go to do that reading. And so just to let you know that the website that I generate these from, it's called A to Z Teacher Stuff. I will send a link to Fergus as well that he can share that with you guys. So it's really useful that if you are doing specific reading with your learners, that you can take those words that is going to be, a bit troublesome for them and create that word search yourself. You can also create crosswords with it, and you can, have a handwriting worksheet generator too. So it's a really useful website for literacy tutors. So then they would be ready to do their reading and comprehension questions. So what I did with this group was we sent out the pack. It had their pre-reading that they were used to doing. They were used to using that method. But I knew that the reading itself might be a bit tricky. Okay, so what I did was I broke the readings down into 3 separate parts and I recorded them on a separate SoundCloud page. So you can see this is a Roald Dahl short story that I've used, which I thought that my group would find quite amusing, but you're going to know what readings to use for your own groups. But you can see here, I have actually learned from my previous mistakes. I have uploaded little images beside each audio file just to make it really, really clear which is part number 1, which is part number 2, and which is part number 3. Again, I was able to upload part number 3 first, then 2, then 1, so that when they arrive on the page, that they can find it in the order that they need to, just to make things as clear as possible. Because I find the easier you make life for your learners, the easier you make life for everybody involved in that class itself. So it meant then that they could do their worksheets, they could do their pre-reading, they could take out their printed piece or their part number 1, and they could click on play and actually listen to the recording as they were reading it to kind of help them out. Now, I know that not all learners are going to have the ability to do that, and not all learners will have access, to the internet or have devices. But for those that did have access to it, or for those that did have maybe someone at home that could help them access it, it was just, again, to try and build on that momentum and to try and, help continue the class in the best way that we could for the time that we have. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how you guys are going to be able to create your own podcast. Okay, so through this process, I have used my Android phone, I have used an iPad, and I have relatively recently found out that you actually have a voice recorder on Windows 10. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through how you would record something on Windows 10, because I think if you're using your app on your phone, it is as straightforward as this. The only hard part is finding the app on your phone. But once you do that, you're up and running. So what you're going to do is on your computer, you're going to type in voice recorder, and you may have to click on the start button to find the search bar as well. But once you do that, you can type it in and it will come up with voice recorder app. So click on that. And if it's something you're going to be using again and again, I would actually recommend that you pin it to your taskbar. Again, you can just find it in one click then. So once you open it up, once you get going with it, this is what it actually looks like. So it's just a big gray square with a little microphone in the center. And once you actually click on that, immediately it will start recording. So once you get to this stage, make sure you have everything that you need around you. Make sure that you have your notes that you're reading, or whatever you need to get yourself up and running. If you're doing this in a classroom, or if you're doing this with learners, make sure that they are fully prepared to go. Okay, because it can be frustrating when you're starting out. Now, it's no problem, and I'd always say to the learners, you don't have to get this in one go. We can, do several takes if you like. The main thing is that you're happy with what we do. But if you are then into multiple re-recordings, it can get quite frustrating. So for the learner themselves. So you want to make this process as easy as possible for them, because that's really when you get the best out of your learners as well. So make sure you're all set up. Once you click on the microphone, it now turns into a stop button. And once you click on that stop button, that's the recording finished. But what I would point out is you do have a little pause button. Okay, and it can make your life a lot easier. If you're in the classroom and you can see that someone's coming to knock on the door, you can see that, someone is or something like that, you can just hit the pause button. It stops the recording where it is, but it allows you to click on that button again and pick up where you left off. So essentially you're joining the two audio recordings together. Whereas if you click on that stop button, you are cutting the recording dead. Essentially, you're saying that you're finished with that recording. Now you do have a little flag. This is like an add marker. So if you want to flag something, if you're getting super fancy with it and you're editing it, I haven't got to that stage yet, but that enables you to put a little marker in certain sections. Now, if you were using this maybe as a form of assessment, you might add markers in. So learner number 1 is starting at this point, learner number 2 is starting at 1 minute 36 or something like that, that it would allow you to flag those different sections as well. So once you have hit on the stop button, you now have a recording saved. To be able to access that recording, you can open up the app itself, but I'm going to show you where you can find it on your computer as well. But it's really important, what I would say, to label these recordings. So if you're doing this with the class, or if you're, doing this with group, before you move on to the next person, make sure that you label the recording itself. So if you right click on the recording, it gives you a little menu, so you're able to then rename it. So you might even just put the initials of the learner in and then what it is, because it's just going to make your life so much easier when you go to uploading those files to the Soundcloud. Now, the other thing as well is you can delete a recording, and what I would say is do delete as you go along. So if you know it's something that you're never going to use, make sure you kind of, keep on top of your file management to make your life that little bit easier. Now, if you forget where your files are stored, you can click on open file location that will show you where they are saved. But before we move on to that, I just want to draw your attention to down on the very bottom of the screen. You can see where that red arrow is pointing to. You can actually trim the audio recordings. So if there's a bit of a lull at the start, which can happen, you can say to your learner, okay, off you go, and they might panic for a second and then they get into it. So it means then that if there is that lull at the start, all you do is click on that button and you slide from left to right. You're trimming essentially that first part of the audio recording off. And likewise, if they trail off at the end, because sometimes learners might forget how they want to finish off, they want to end in a particular way, but it hasn't worked out for them and they might just kind of trail off themselves, you can trim down the end of the recording as well. So that does that for you in the app just by clicking on that button there. And again, it really helps to boost or build the learner's confidence, when you're saying, this happens to everybody, this is why we have, editing software, this is why the trim button exists, so it's no problem once you can do that. So in terms of finding these files once you've recorded them, so you're going to have to be able to tell SoundCloud where to find these files. And if you're using the voice recorder in Windows 10, the default save is into your documents folder. And once you start using the app, there will be a sound recordings folder in there. So you'll go to your documents, you'll open sound recordings, and you will be able to see that recording there. So when you open up your SoundCloud account, in your first file, that's where you will find it. So to get to SoundCloud itself, you're just going to type it into Google. You'll click on the link to open up the website. And I will say as well, actually, it used to be the case where you could only upload files from a desktop or a laptop computer. Now in the app itself, it does give you the ability, or I think it gives you the ability to upload from your phone or from your iPad. So if you are recording on your phone, it might be much easier to download the app and upload that way. If you would prefer not to use the app, if you would prefer to do it on the computer and you are using your phone or your iPad to record the podcasts themselves, you can transfer those files the same way you would a photograph. So you can use your charger cable to connect the device to your computer, and you can transfer those files to your computer that way as well. So once you sign in to SoundCloud, now again, you just need an email address and create a password, and you can create a SoundCloud account. Fergus will send out a video on that process itself. So all you need to do is click on the upload button, and it is really, really straightforward. So all you need to do is tell SoundCloud where to find it. So your documents folder, your sound recordings, and then click on the file that you want to upload. But you can also use the click and drag method as well, which is much, much easier. And the great thing that I like with SoundCloud is you can have a public profile, but you can also have a private profile. So if you click on the private profile, it means that only people with a link can see the audio files, to see that they exist and then listen to them. So it means if you're using it with literacy learners, if you're using it maybe as a form of assessment with the group, that you can keep it completely private, and then you can share that link with the coordinator of that group, and they can share it with the external authenticator as well. So it's a very real possibility for using it, for assessment with groups as well. So once you select the file, you can click on the file and open, or you can drag and drop, and this is what it looks like. So it does take a little while to upload, and it will, show you we're processing your track, and it's going to make your life a lot easier. If you rename the file to what you want it to appear to in the SoundCloud, it will go in automatically. So you can see the title has gone in automatically for me. Now you can change that once you're on the SoundCloud website, but I'm all for making your life easier where possible or where you can. Now you can create a specific genre for it. You can add it to a genre if you want to. You can add tags. This is a great way to be able to teach your learners about what a tag is, particularly if they're interested in using Facebook or something like that. What does it mean to tag somebody? It makes you more visible or more findable online. You can add a description and you can add a caption. Generally, I don't add tags to my SoundCloud recordings because we haven't used it yet in that way. And it is really just for learners to be able to have access to it rather than the wider public. Once you are happy that you have all of the information in there, you can click on the save button and that will save it to your SoundCloud profile itself. Now you can go back in and you can edit work, you can edit titles, but you cannot edit unless you upgrade and pay for it, the audio files themselves. So you can just, if you notice something, I would just, delete it and re-upload it. So this is what it looks like after you upload. You can upload more files, trying to make your life a little bit easier that you can do it all in the one place. But to see what it actually looks like, then you just click on the name of your SoundCloud and you'll see a little menu appear. So you're going to go to your profile then as well. And you can see where your audio file has uploaded to. You can use the share button if you want to share through social media, things like that, or you can actually just copy and paste the link. And typically that's what I do because I'm sending it as an email link to people. So I find that the easiest way to share them. Really important, as I mentioned earlier, to know how to upload the file, but equally important to know how to delete it. I always say to my learners, do we have permission to upload this? And they're aware of, it is online. It's not going to be shared with the wider public, but it allows you to have that conversation with them, that once you put something up online, it is there for everybody to see. So we have that conversation. And I say, if further down the line, you would like me to remove that track or you'd like me to delete it, it's no problem because we have the delete option here. So it shows them then that they have that control over as well, that, no matter what stage they get to, we can take it down if they want to. But equally, if you've uploaded the wrong file and given it the wrong title, or you want to replace it, you can delete it and do that. And if you do go to delete your file, it will actually just reconfirm that with you, because once it's gone, it's gone. And what I would say is, before you delete anything from SoundCloud, make sure that you do have the replacement or the alternative saved on your phone, your iPad, or your computer as well. So that has been my experience with SoundCloud. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to leave it over to you guys. We're going to ask you a couple of questions and we're going to use the breakout rooms in Zoom. So what we're going to do is we're going to chat a little bit about how you could use SoundCloud with your learners, what projects you could use this for in a digital skills class, and what pre-reading methods do you use with your learners. So we're all coming together, we're sharing our skills, we're sharing our knowledge in the hopes of helping each other out, learning from each other. But what I would say is, before we break into those breakout rooms.
Hello.
You're very welcome back. So I think what we might do, I think everybody should be back at this stage. So what we're going to do is we're going to go around to the different groups or the different rooms, if that's okay. We'll start off with room number 1. So do we have a spokesperson from room number 1? That's yourself?
That would be one.
Okay, yes, I wasn't sure what our room number was, so thanks, Tracy.
No problem. Well, you're very well. So thanks for being brave enough to report back to the main group. And what I'd like you to share with us is maybe just one point that came up, and elaborate then on that point to the wider group, if that's okay.
I think one of the points that came up was how lockdown has changed a lot of how we're communicating, and that the audio option, it's perfect for things like language. If someone's trying to learn Irish, they can listen to the pronunciation over and over again. If someone's telling a story for things like the libraries, for heritage aspects, all of these come together in audio, and it's a much easier way for people to be able to access the information.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. I'm not sure that we had room 2 number open, or so can we move to room number 3, if that's okay? Do we have a spokesperson from room number 3?
Did you say room number 3? Was it?
Room number 3, yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
No problem,
I'll
Sarah.
try and talk. There was Lisa. It was in the. There was Lisa and there was Siobhan and myself, and we just talked generally about podcasting and the great presentation. We really enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you.
Lisa is actually working in the library area, and she said what they're trying to do, working on podcasts to get dyslexic teenagers to get more involved in reading and writing and literacy. So that was one area that they were looking at. And then Siobhan is, she's in the area of family learning, and she and I were just talking about the information that you gave us about the pre-reading, the word shapes, the look, read, write, cover. We thought that was brilliant. We'd encountered it with our own children in primary school, but we didn't have clear, a clear thing to follow with adults as such.
Okay, yeah.
So we kind of talked about how we would incorporate podcasting, and Siobhan was saying that you make it relevant to the student itself, find out what they're interested, what they want to talk about. I myself personally, I'm always listening to podcasts and radio things, and I'm always surrounded by, I don't want to look at books or reading, you know, I don't have the time, I'm skimming all the time. So it's something I really would like to incorporate. I teach Syrian, so it's something that we could do, you know, interviewing them, talking about stuff. They have low levels of literacy as well. I think Siobhan mentioned, no, sorry, it was Lisa that mentioned, yeah, it will be ideal for people with low levels of literacy. So we had a general conversation about the presentation and the podcasting and what we would do in our own environment.
Great, thank you very much for sharing that, Sarah. And I think that's a really important point you've made about materials for adult learners. It's very easy to acquire, you know, primary level that is very childlike, and you want to be really mindful of that when you're giving materials to your learners, that it is appropriate for their age level as well. So I'm very happy to share that method with everybody, and pass on that website as well that Fergus will be able to share with everyone that they can use too. So we are going to come to room number 4, if that's okay. So whatever group hasn't spoken yet, you're up.
Okay, I think that's me. So
Geraldine.
Yeah, we were, again, same as the other speakers, we talked around the different ways we could use it, because really it's definitely something that I'm interested in incorporating in, because I think for the flipped classroom idea, it's definitely a good way of kind of giving your learners some information before the class. And it also kind of gives that for learners that maybe are not confident reading, or they just don't particularly like reading. The audio is another way of kind of, you know, giving them another option.
Absolutely.
ESOL, I think, was probably the main area that we were saying it could be really, really useful in, because it gives learners, you know, the opportunity to listen to pronunciation and things like that. So yeah, loads of ideas. Lisa was saying about like to use tablets, to get the learners using the tablets that they have in their centre. So like loads of different ways. She was just thinking, even just off the top of her head, she was saying internet safety, talking about that, getting them to access it, I suppose, and maybe record themselves talking about what they've learned about internet safety, maybe, or different interviews for ESOL. There's loads of options there. So
the scope is endless.
It is, really is, yeah.
Brilliant, great stuff. So guys, I'm delighted you were able to join us. I think there's some great feedback coming from those breakout rooms. And before we finish up, does anybody have any other points that they would like to make, or anything that hasn't been mentioned yet that they'd like to share? Oh yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I was surprised to see that most formats can be uploaded onto SoundCloud or Podbean. But what I was wondering was, until you know that you want to broadcast it, or does it go up sort of to anyone age or whatever?
You've frozen on me for a second there. Would you mind repeating that question?
if you're just learning, and you put your first audio file up, is it automatically public?
Now,
That's
that's a really good question, because that's something you really want to be careful with your learners, particularly if they are learning. So in that section, when you are uploading it, there is, before you save it, the option of public or private. So once you click on that private section, that means that if I go onto SoundCloud and I search for your name, I'm not going to find you. It's only people that have that email link that can actually access that audio file. And I think that's really important to be clear on, because we are all very protective of our learners. So we want to be able to give them, you know, that sense of anonymity while they are learning those digital skills. So thanks very much for asking that question. So we just have a question in the chat there from Tracy. So when you choose private, can learners download that file? So it is usually the uploader that chooses the permissions for that, okay? So you would kind of select whether people can download your SoundCloud file or not. So guys, I think we're going to finish up there, if that's okay. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you can learn from what I've done, take it, improve it, make it even better, and have some fun with your learners in the process.
Caroline, could I ask one last question? Sorry to interrupt you, but the podcast that you've done with your students, is it possible to share one of those just to see what the format is?
Yeah, absolutely. That's no problem. That's no problem.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Do you want to send it to me, Caroline, and I'll email it to everybody?
Of course I will, no problem.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else have a question there before we finish up? No. Okay. It just leaves to me to say thanks very much to Caroline Brennan for a really wonderful and informative presentation. I felt she was really clear and went through at a great pace, and people could take in what she said, her tips and ideas. And she also put a lot of effort and work into the presentation, where she did a lot of screenshots. So Caroline, thanks very much for that. And thanks everyone for joining. And I hope, it seems from the chat that people got a lot from Caroline's excellent presentation and enjoyed it. So hope you enjoyed it. I'll send on Caroline's presentation and any websites or links she sends on to me to you afterwards. So thanks very much, everyone. Goodbye. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, guys. See you.
Thanks, Caroline.